to make a shift in an organization, you actually have to understand both what's required at an individual level to shift, because if nobody does anything differently, your organization hasn't changed, but also at an organizational level, because unless the organizational structures change a bit, the individual behaviors aren't going to change. But they feel as related as Newtonian physics and quantum physics do. In other words, they don't work at all together, but somehow they coexist and they explain the universe.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I'm Rodney Evans, and we have a very exciting guest episode today. Michael Bungay Stanier is joining me. Michael is a legend in the world of coaching, leadership, and soon to be a re-emerging legend in the world of change. You probably know him from The Coaching Habit, his best-selling book, but primarily today, we are here to nerd out about a newer project, which is his new podcast, Change Signal. I am already a big fan of this podcast, which is getting Michael back to his roots in all things change and transformation. Michael, thank you for being a three-peat on our show. It's so good to have you back.
I appreciate your poor short-term memory, which means that when I knock on your door and say, can I come back? You're like, I can't remember how the last two episodes went. Sure, we'll have you back. But it's nice to see you again, Rodney.
They seemed fun. Let's do it again. Let's keep doing it. Awesome. So I have so much that I want to ask you about today. I am just absolutely delighted by your show, and I'm learning a lot as a podcast host by listening to you do it.
Oh, that's high praise. Thank you.
But first, we got to check in. Our friend Sam is not here today because apparently when we have a guest on this show, one of us has to mess up our back and lay on the floor.
Exactly. If it's not Jason Fox, which was a great episode, it's Sam with me. So Jason's a friend of mine, so I will text him going that they're ganging up against us. They can't handle the truth.
This is what happens. One of us ends up with terrible FOMO while the other one gets to talk to one of our heroes. So our check-in question for today is a fun one, which is, do you have a not work-related goal that you are working toward right now?
I have two not work-related goals that I'm working to because I'm nothing if not slightly overcommitted.
Okay.
So here are my two not work-related goals. The first is to fall back in love with Toronto. So I live in Toronto, though I am Australian, and I have just been a bit grumpy about my life in Toronto for maybe the last 5 years. Winter, I finally realized that my wife, who's been telling me that I will come to love winter for 15 years, has been lying to me. I'm like, I'm never going to come to love winter. I'm just biologically designed to not enjoy winter, and unfortunately, it is her favorite season. So I realized that it looks like we will be living here one way or another for the rest of our lives, because we've looked at trying to move to other places and they're all a little too complicated. So I'm like, okay, so I've got to make this place really work for me. So not only do I have to kind of refresh my attitude to Toronto, I've also got to find new people in Toronto who I can fall in love with, who can be my people, because I'm slightly lonely here in Toronto as well. I don't really have all the people I want to have around me. So that's one of the goals I've got, which is fall in love with this city. And the second goal is to be in the best shape of my life. Now, this comes from it sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud, but this comes from a little mastermind group that I've got. And we started at the start of this year. We've met 3 times. We meet every 6 weeks or so. And another one of the members brought this up as one of his goals, and I guess we all kind of jumped in on that in terms of we're not totally sure what that means for us, but we're going to have a think about that. So I have a VO2 max score that I am trying to get to, because
I don't know what any of those things
I don't
mean.
know. I know. I bet it's basically your capacity to do longevity exercises like running and rowing and stuff. It's like, what's your lung capacity? Kind of basically, what's your lung capacity? And I'm like, okay, so look, I don't really care about muscles, and I don't really care about being too thin or too fat or any of that, but I would like to still be fit for my age. And so I've got a weird VO2 max thing, which means that I exercise and I row and stuff like that. So yeah, I've got 2 goals that are trying to make me fitter and happier.
Those are great goals. You really also had those like right off the cuff.
Oh yeah. Well,
Yeah, that's
I journal every morning. I launched my own journal a few months ago, and my little card with here are my 4 goals for the whole year, and I look at it every morning, and then respond to some questions that I use to prompt me. So they're really top of mind for me.
that is fascinating. This is very interesting. Sometime you and I need to maybe talk about goals. I have a very
Yeah,
complicated relationship with them.
me too. What's a personal goal you're working on?
I don't have any goals that I'm working on, but I have practices that I'm working on.
I love
So I've
that.
talked a lot on this show about the evolution of my musical practice.
Excellent.
I was a classically trained cellist as a child,
That's
and I
great.
was very, very serious about it. And in the last bunch of years, I've embarked on learning how to play improvisationally and learning how to play by ear and doing a whole bunch of other things that I find quite scary because I
Mhm.
love in fact, I have sheet music right here. I love the comfort and safety of sheet music that I can play correctly.
Right.
Right now, so that has been something that's underway. And now I am starting to actually arrange things.
Ooh,
So
that's
moving sort of
wonderful.
from learning by ear to soloing improvisationally, which I still am kindergarten level at both of those
Yeah.
things. But what I'm realizing is that in order to employ those new skills and practice those new skills, I need to be creating containers with other musicians to do them. So I have to collaborate with people where they're not just like, here's a part, play it.
Yeah.
And, I can only spend so many hours playing along with a backing track. So I am starting to actually figure out what arrangement with other people looks like. And so
Mm,
far, I'm mostly playing with people who haven't done a lot of it. So
right.
that's it's interesting because they are deferring to me on a skill that I am an incredible novice on. And I don't
Yeah.
know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's allowing me to practice very freely because clearly they have no idea just how inept I actually am.
That's great. So I need to start just calling you Ro Ma now, right?
Sure.
Um,
That is a first, and I will take it, and I love it.
it's so interesting as you talk about this tension between the safety and the comfort and the familiarity of bars with black dots on it, and being able to go, I get a tick for that because I nailed all the notes,
Yes.
and the improvisation. And just what I imagine is, the work you do at the Ready around this similar tension between structure and non-structure, following rules, abandoning rules, uh, emergence in collaboration. There's this dance I can guess is out in your music must also be showing up in an interesting way in the work you do.
Absolutely. And, it's interesting that you say this. It's not something I've thought a terrible amount about, but I do think that a lot of traditional ways of working are much more like classical music. It's
Right,
like when there's going to be the big town hall or the big board meeting, the
right,
idea is that the performance and the dress rehearsal are identical. The
right.
idea is that the dress rehearsal is perfect and then the performance goes just like that.
Yeah,
And in the work that we do and that you do, it is much more like jazz, where there is structure and we have a key and we have a time signature. And we're not just going to have a random like theremin
yeah,
play that we weren't expecting to be there. But what happens within those clear constraints is less rehearsed and predictable. And it's a
yeah.
very, it's a significant difference in the experience and certainly in terms of having to be very present to the moment.
Yeah, it's such an interesting metaphor. In part because like I've often gone to a classical concert and looked at the people on stage and gone, "You are all brilliant musicians. What is it like just not being able to do anything but follow somebody else's conductorly lead the whole time?" Like,
Yeah.
particularly if you're like in the second violin, so your job is just to kind of follow the music and follow the rules, and you've got what feels like no sense of autonomy in that space. And of course, jazz is a great metaphor, but the problem for me is like I mostly don't like jazz. And
Oh,
like I just don't understand it enough. And I think most people don't like jazz. I mean, it's a bit of a niche genre of music. So I always worry when people like us go, yeah, but just, and Jason Fox is like this. He uses the jazz metaphor as well. And I'm like, but most people don't like jazz. So what do we do with that?
Maybe it's more like a folk jam. Maybe it's more accessible to people.
Buy into. That I
to
can
be
totally
in
buy
the
into. Yeah,
space of folk and bluegrass.
Yeah, it is for me anyway. Because the idea of like throwing the lead to different people in the band.
Yeah.
Like I know what key we're in. I know when we've shifted a key. I know what our time signature is. So I get enough of the structure around me. But there's a sense of playfulness that's there that sometimes is missing in that more structured way.
It can be like rock and roll, Michael. I mean, if you watch a great band that throws the solos around, you know that they're not playing the same rote solo every time.
That's true. That's why I love Bob Dylan, because Bob Dylan is the most erratic person on the planet.
This is why I love the band that backed Bob Dylan forever.
That's right.
I mean,
exactly.
The best. Okay, now, are we checked in minute 26?
I think so. And we've done a music podcast, so we can spin that off as our side hustle, which is like Rodney and Michael on music genres.
Perfect. I love it.
What are we actually here to talk about again? Yeah.
Okay, so this is the thing that stuck with me from our conversation last year.
Mm-hmm.
You said to me, I'm going to start this podcast next year, and my aim is to unweird change.
Yes.
Do you still say that, or was that early days?
I do experiment with that, in part because one of the way I talk about the coaching habit and the impact it's had over the last 9 or 10 years is it's unweirded coaching for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So when people read that book, they go, oh, okay, if this is coaching, it's a whole lot less woo-woo and less kind of caftan wearing, incense lighting, mumbo jumbo. It's about staying curious a little bit longer.
Right.
And I'm deeply proud of the impact that book has had. And I'd love to try and figure something out for change. I'm not sure it's unweirding it, but it feels related, adjacent perhaps, which is like, it feels like a lot of the change landscape lies under the fug of 1970s smoke and mist. And I'd like to be a wind that blows some of that away and helps people feel more confident about letting go of some old beliefs, patterns, models, whatever around change, and start helping to find the good stuff that is showing up and emerging. Like your work around depth finding, so helpful, so interesting, so metaphorically rich. It's great. But a lot of people are like, yeah, but I know John Cotter in 7 steps or 8 steps or whatever it is. And I'm like, it's time to put John Cotter aside. I mean, he's that's an old model, and we're in 2025. Let's move on from that. So there is something about stirring this place up and finding the good stuff that works, because there is some great stuff being done out there, but it feels like it's a world where old stories predominate.
I like that. Well, for what it's worth, the unweirding language really stuck with me all of these months later. I've thought about it. I've thought about that phrase probably once a week since you and I spoke last year, because there is something weird about it. And part of the weirdness is how ineffective it is. And there's also something that I notice in the change landscape, which is it tends to sort of swing between two polarities. On the one side, you have very process heavy, comms heavy, plan heavy, very heady, managementy stuff. And on the other side, I often feel like the change professionals in a place are like the birthday cakes and like gratitude vibes people. And I'm like, it's neither of those things. Like, let's stop doing both of those.
Right. Right.
And it is weird to me that I think what I see out in the world is that those feel like the most common menu options is like, birthday cakes and high fives, or like a 7-step plan.
Well, for me, one of the ways that this stuff gets separated out is just people who have more of a bias towards individual change and thinking about the individual shift that's required, and the people who worry more about the organizational change. And it always sounds the same. It's like change. It's change management. Of course, management is more and more a ridiculous thing to attach to change. But, and the metaphor I use for this is I feel like to make a shift in an organization, you actually have to understand both what's required at an individual level to shift, because if nobody does anything differently, your organization hasn't changed, but also at an organizational level, because unless the organizational structures change a bit, the individual behaviors aren't going to change. But they feel as related as Newtonian physics and quantum physics do. In other words, they don't work at all together, but somehow they coexist and they explain the universe. And it's naive to think the same expertise and the same frameworks and the same mindset really can move from one to the other. And I think if you are in change and transformation and evolution and growth, whatever the right term is, it's helpful immediately just to go, well, where's my bias towards this? Of these two, which do I know the most about? Which do I think is most important? Which one do I kind of go, if I was planning this is where I would start with this? And then within individual and organizational change, you have bad, dated, sucky versions of tactics within that.
Yeah.
And some of that is that kind of over planning thing that you're talking about. And some of it is let's light the birthday candles and just hug it out in the individual change. But I think the truth is that in both of those spheres, there are things you need to know and you need to understand and you need to do well to really make change happen.
What are the most important ones at the individual level and the organizational level based on your journey so far? These many years.
Well, and let me say that as I start this Change Signal project, I really feel like I'm learning my way into this. Like I'm just trying to figure this stuff out for myself. But here's my working hypothesis. And it starts with understanding not only is there individual and organizational change, there's easy change and hard change, which, if you know the Ron Heifetz work, he would call it adaptive change and technical change, or the immunity to change work is kind of based on this as well. But I think of it as this, like easy change is when you know where you are, you know where you want to go. And the way you make a difference is you learn something, you try something, you get some feedback, you learn some more, you try some more, you get some more feedback, and you kind of keep going to the level of mastery that is required. So it is stuff that honestly lends itself to spreadsheets. It's trackable. I can see it. It's tangible. I know when it's working. I know when it's not working. Hard change is elusive and amorphous and non-spreadsheetable, and it's hard to come at directly. Easy change you can tackle directly. Hard change you have to kind of come at sideways. And hard change is often trying to surface the stuff that feels more amorphous, or perhaps you'd say more in the twilight or the midnight zones, kind of like harder to pin down. And a first lesson in all of this is the tactics that work in individual change don't work in organizational change, and vice versa. And likewise, the tactics that work for individual easy change don't work for hard change, and vice versa. So, but imagine, if you will, a 2x2 matrix.
I already was imagining it.
Exactly.
That was going to be my next question is there going to be a quadrant, and should we draw it, or is it already done?
It's like I've drawn it many times as I try and figure this stuff out, because the way I work ideas is I just relentlessly and endlessly draw it until I can't think of any way of making it better. But there we go. Individual, organizational on the horizontal axis, easy change, hard change on the vertical axis. So I think there are two catalysts in each box. I don't want to call them levers because levers is already into a mechanical metaphor and it's not mechanical. But I think if you're looking at what is best to shift for individual easy change, I think there are two things that you could think about doing well. The first is good training, which, corporations and organizations are rife with terrible, terrible training.
Yeah.
And I think the other one is habit building. It's like a really explicit understanding of when this happens, instead of doing this, I'm going to do that instead. And obviously, neither training or habit building are simple to do, or just I can do this, I'll get this done by tomorrow. But you can track habits and you can track training, and there's so much known about how to build a good habit or to build a good training experience. Still takes something to pull it off, but you can do that. For organizational easy change, the two things that I think sit there are marketing and project management. So marketing is, how do we make this change feel palatable or exciting or compelling? And honestly, organizations do such a bad job at this so often. Sometimes it's the CEO going, it's going to be 7% more this year, as if that's motivating for anybody other than the people who get a bonus for that. And sometimes it's all a bit woo-woo, or sometimes it doesn't get marketed at all. It just gets forced upon it. So it's like, what does it take to make this something that people go, look, I'm tired and I'm overwhelmed, but I might be up for that. That feels like it might deliver something to me. And then there is some version of project management that is often required. And it's so easy to do that badly. Like, it comes back to the goal conversation we were having before, which is like, as soon as you set metrics that become the targets, they're terrible metrics. So how do we measure success? How do we know what's going on? How do we track some of that? So being able to do project management in a way that is light and agile and appropriate is part of what's an easy change. So those are the two things in each of those two boxes. And then if you go up to hard change, I think for individual change, the two things that occur to me here are, one is processing grief for what is being left behind. Because in the coach, in all the work I've done, it's just increasingly obvious to me how tightly we are hugged by the status quo. Even when we don't like it, we have all these commitments to what I get from this.
Of course.
It's this classic community to change stuff, which is like, you have to figure out your hidden competing commitments to what you say you want. And so there's something about, how do you process what's being lost? And then the other thing that I think sits here is, how do you invite people to have agency? I still have no idea how to figure this one out, because you can't force it on people, because that's a contradiction. I'm going to make you more agentic. I'm going to give you more agency is a statement that is inherently contradictory. So how do you invite people forward to, what Peter Block would say, take responsibility for their own freedom? Particularly when you've got, in so many organizations, structures that make it easy to just kind of wait and be told what to
Hide.
do. Yeah, just to hide, just to go, look, whatever, I'll just do what I'm told. I'll just follow the thing. I won't take responsibility for what's mine to own or to play with. And then finally, in the final box, which is hard change at an organizational level, the two things that I think about here, one is how power works in organizations. Where is power? Who holds power? How do you influence power? How do you be comfortable with power? And the second is just structural stuff, which is like, what are the big structures? Because, that Winston Churchill quote, first we shape our organizations, thereafter they shape us. But actually moving the walls, visible and invisible, is a hard thing to pull off. So I think if you're like thinking about all of those, most people have strengths in some of those and know that they're not that good in some others and are probably ignoring some of the other points altogether.
Mm-hmm.
But that's as good as I've got at the moment, Rodney.
I love it.
What do you like about it? I mean, what strikes you when you hear that?
Well, a few things. First is that it's interesting because I wrote it as you were saying it, and it does feel like distinct in some ways, but also like incredibly interrelated. And so when I think about something like training and habit building, it's sort of like where we started this conversation with me working with my new musician friend, where it's like, if the people who are meant to be participants and consumers and architects and beneficiaries of a change don't have the skill set to engage with it, or don't have the foundational habits so that they have the cognitive space to do the new thing, you're kind of fucked from the jump. So I like both the training and the habit building to me feel like lowering the cognitive load for individuals so that they could do something harder.
I love that. I hadn't thought of that, but that's great. Yeah.
And then you can move up from there, because moving into agency, processing your own experience, like those things require a really high degree of self-awareness. And if you are missing skills or you don't already have foundational habits that are supported, you're never going to get after those higher order things.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you're making me think about it as the legendary hierarchy of needs, which Maslow never actually put into a hierarchy. Somebody else drew a picture about that later.
We do love triangles.
We do love triangles. If it's not a square with a cross in the middle, it's a triangle. But an ability which is like, you need this in place for this to kind of open up as a possibility for people.
I think so. I mean, and I only think, having done this work in large organizations where I feel like so much of our Twilight Zone work is creating really good, very basic kind of work hygiene so that they can do something that is harder. Because if they don't have good hygiene around meetings and decisions and resource allocation and structure and budget and feedback and whatever, then how are you going to do something that is as sophisticated as an important AI experiment? Like, you're just not.
Yeah.
So I love that. I also, the turn of phrase that you used in terms of marketing and like saying things to people in such a way that like they can determine what they might be up for, I actually feel like it's very connected to the invitation into agency. Because what you're not doing is trying to sell, which I see far too many internal comms folks just trying to like put lipstick on a pig, throw it in an email, and just like hope that everybody's psyched. And like, spoiler, they're not. And I feel like the pairing of those two to me is really interesting, because if what we're saying is basically as marketers to the organization, here's the next hill or volcano that we intend to take, it is going to require the exercising of the power that you do have in this organization. Would you like a backpack? That's a very different sort of orientation than let us bullshit you on how great this is and then convince you to minimally contribute.
Yeah, that is interesting. And it reminds me of a conversation I had with Rachel Botsman. This is an upcoming episode for the podcast, and she's an expert on trust. And what was really interesting for me, I hadn't thought of this before, was understanding that just like in marketing, you have different segments. So you market to different people in different ways. In organizations, people have different trust readiness. And there are some people who like climb up the volcano and you're like, yeah, sure, I love that stuff. And there's a bunch of other people who are like, look, I'm much more worried about where we are now, and I've got a lack of trust readiness around that. And understanding what this marketing and kind of how it feeds up to agency, so one message isn't going to be good enough. You actually need to be speaking to different people at different levels of readiness to have to be heard properly.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the last thing is just like, I think it's an interesting moment, and I'd be curious for your take on this. I just listened. I was at a thing last week, and I heard two people from the stage talk about basically this moment that the leadership trend in the zeitgeist, particularly in the U.S., is directive, it is regressive, it is command and control, etc. And so, A, I'm curious, just like your general read on that. But B, I feel like power illiteracy is such a problem in organizations. And the fact that people think that through influence, communication, manipulation, people don't recognize what power dynamics are actually at play and are going to work against their own interests and not. It's insane. Like, it's just, it's insane to me. So I'm psyched that you call it out, because doing structural work without real acknowledgement of what the power structure is seems silly to me, and like you're missing most of the story. And I'm also curious, like, what you're feeling and seeing in this moment around power.
Before I answer that second question, can I ask you, because I love the phrase power illiteracy. That's another phrase I've heard before, and it's really resonant. How do you help people become more power literate?
Yeah. So this is not, I would not tell you that I am an expert in this. And someone who I used to work with, whose work is amazing, named Larissa Conte, is an expert in power, and I highly recommend her stuff. I've learned a lot about power from working with her and reading her over the years. We effectively go at this by making things explicit. So I don't go at power conversations from a very squishy place, because to me, mostly power and privilege shows up as an ability to avoid being explicit. Like, power shows up in vagueness. The more power you have, the less you have to like commit and be held accountable and write shit down. And like, that's just how it looks in the world. You get to be slippery when you're powerful. And so a lot of our work is unslipperying things through like role clarity, written decision rights, clear like ways of working, because people with power usually don't have a nuanced understanding of what that is and how it shows up in a room. And so basically I tend to go at it through intervention rather than through a lot of one-on-one work.
That's great. I've never really, I haven't figured that out before. So I'm really just sitting with that, and also just going, oh, this tells me how much power I have in my organizations, because I am slippery around a whole bunch of stuff. And I was like, oh, that's just me. That's just the way I am, man. But actually it speaks to, which is also true, but it also speaks to the fact that, you know, in many of the organizations I'm part of, I'm senior, or I'm a founder or something. And that just allows me to get away with stuff.
Yeah.
And allows me to not have to be explicit or commit or be tangible. So that's really great. That's really helpful.
Cool.
To your question around what am I seeing, there is no doubt that our lizard brain loves certainty. And the more chaotic things get, the more we crave for certainty. So there is a way that the zeitgeist in a place of chaos goes, so would somebody just tell me what the hell is going on here and what the hell I should be doing around that? And I would love somebody just to point the way for me. And there is that way that certainly for me, and I'm in Canada. So, you know, when you talk about the States, we just watch the States with a level of nervousness. We all feel a bit paralyzed by that, just going, well, maybe our new prime minister will just tell us what to do. But, you know, I've been thinking around So what does it mean to be in this time where, for me, the world is moving in a way that is moving away from stuff that I believe in terms of big picture politics and smaller picture way organizations should be, and this idea of self-management and bringing out people's best and all of that stuff. I'm like, okay, so how do you be what would it mean to be an activist in this space at this time? Because one of the privileges of power, which I have in many ways, is an ability to be, as I realize now, kind of slippery around not needing to do much around it. I'll just go, well, maybe it'll all go away and maybe I won't be affected too much around that. But I do think this capacity to say, look, in a world where things feel more chaotic and less certain at a macro and micro level, what does this capacity of non-directive leadership look like now, when that lizard brain of yours is like, just tell people what to do, or at least get people to tell you what to do, because that both feels more comfortable. But it feels like a short-term win rather than a longer-term commitment to capacity and resilience.
Yeah, that tracks. It feels like I really feel the observation that the more chaos there is, the more, the more desire for certainty there is. And I think that my very like unnuanced take is basically that, like, in peacetime, we tend to be more psychologically flexible and more open to experimentation and just more progressive as a species. And in what feels like wartime globally, there just tends to be a regression to more traditional ways of being and thinking. And fundamentally, my hope is that, like, there is a third way out of that just doesn't have enough history behind it yet, but will be the new norm. Because I ultimately think that what people need and want, and I'm curious if you do, because I'm literally making this up as I'm saying it, but I think what people need and want isn't directiveness, it's clarity, so that they can make I don't think people fundamentally want to be told what to do and how to do it most of the time. But I think they do want really clear structure and scaffolding and rails from which to operate.
Yeah. So you said you used the word clarity. I was going to use the word certainty. And they're not quite the same, but they're related. And part of what I've been experimenting as a facilitator is, how do I set up structures that allow a process to feel self-facilitated? So I'm not the person going, okay, ding, here's a bell, now do this. Okay, ding, now do that. But there's a way I can kind of build something that allows people to have enough certainty and enough autonomy that a thing feels mostly self-directed. And the question is if you're part of Rodney and Michael's gang in terms of how you think about organizations and you think about leadership, and if it rings a bell for you too around, well, people need more certainty and clarity in this moment, what needs to be true for you to create certainty and clarity in a way that enhances rather than diminishes autonomy and self-sufficiency and agency? And that's and please send your answers in a postcard to Rodney and me, because I'd like to know. But it feels like that's the question to sit with, which is like, how do I build more certainty and more clarity, but not in a way that the price paid is I remove other people's autonomy.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like in your catalysts, I see a lot of options that are really positive. And I am curious about what you think has outlived its utility. What are the things that you're seeing as you spelunk fully into the present world of change that you're just like, let this shit die. Nobody needs this anymore?
Well, the things that are occurring to me are, first of all, this is a phrase that came from somebody I talked to the other day who runs change in a big company, and she's like, "Change by decree. It's just dead." Like it never really worked, but we could pretend for a while. But it's absolutely dead now.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is, and this is, I kind of knew it, but this has just become really apparent, which is, can you even talk about change now? Like when I started 30 years ago, there were literally change projects. We're going to do a change project, and here's when it starts, and hopefully here's when it finishes, and here's how we'll track that change project. And now it just feels like it's work, which is it's constantly in flux. And so is there any point in declaring the start of something or the finish of something? And there might be, because, Katie Milkman's work tells us that actually declaring starting points and middle points and end points of stuff is helpful to orient around work.
I loved that episode. Everyone should go listen. I'm a huge fan of hers.
Yeah, she's fantastic. But it's, there's multiple change projects happening all the time. So how do you now talk about standing in the river of work when these different currents are pulling you one way or another, and just one of the currents is this is what we expect your role to be, and the rest is this changing world. And I'm I don't know what the answer is to this, but one of the other episodes with Carolyn Webb that came out recently, one of her key insights was, before you do anything, take an audit of what's actually going on around you, because almost certainly you are woefully naive at the amount of stuff that is currently happening, and the amount of stuff that is just probably, what did they say, when you get a drug from a doctor that clashes with another drug,
interactions or counterindications or something like that.
Yeah, counterindications. Thank you. That's exactly it. There's so much going on that probably is going to annul the impact of whatever you're dreaming of right now. But there's this fantasy that somehow we're starting with a blank-ish slate. So much of what I'm learning around change is you have to do a better job at understanding context of what's going on for the people where they're at, that change readiness that we talked about earlier, what's going on in terms of the other change stuff that is competing with your change stuff, and just the context of what it means to work now means to be constantly in flux. So how do you help people in that moment in a way that might be different?
It's really interesting that was your answer, because I had written a question that I was feeling slightly sheepish about asking you because I'm not sure that I'm convicted about this yet. But here's what I wrote. It said, given the pace of work, might we reconceive of change as simply operating an organization? Why is it a separate thing?
Well, that's the truth of it, I think. And so what does it mean to therefore just build in change capacity throughout an organization in a way that, look, we just need people to have these abilities and this ability to sit with ambiguity and this ability to stay curious and this ability to stay generous and the ability to in those moments where the shit is going down, to stay open rather than tighten up. How do you build these in as ongoing elements of capacity so you manage the overwhelming experience for most of us of what it means to work?
Yeah.
So it's like, maybe the goal of Change Signal is just to retire the whole idea of change. And just go, because I've been trying to figure out what label to put on all of this stuff, and I'm like, change management feels like so 1991. Change feels very 1997. Transformation feels like, that's 2008.
Yep.
growth feels like it's now losing the point altogether, and it's just one of those vague words that people jazz hands around. Like, I'm not sure what language we use around this anymore, because it feels like it just limits it and sidelines it, rather than makes it into a kind of, this is just what it means to be a complex organization in a complex world, and stuff is emerging and shifting and changing all the time.
Yeah. That feels right. It feels right. I don't know what to call it either. You'll figure it out and you will tell me.
All right. Well, let me ask you this before you wrap us up. Of everything we talked about, what most struck a chord for you?
What strikes me is that you are on a quest, as I am, to like figure something out about this. And so, and you know, the reason that there's 50 years of praxis around this is because we do have such a desire as human beings to like crack this particular nut. And yet, like, humanity and nature and complex systems are inherently evolutionary. And so it is fascinating to me that, like, what I notice even in some of the specific examples you gave from conversations with other people, my own experience, your experience, is like there's congruence and there's conflict. And also we have this desire to figure something out that feels like it should be natural, but it's not.
Yeah.
And that's what strikes me.
Yeah, that's great. There is something about surprisingly elusive about this, and I'm enjoying having to chase it. I think what I loved, what I'm still thinking about is you had so much good stuff that you offered me, but this idea of power literacy, I just think that's such an interesting turn of phrase, and I love how it frames power as a language to be learned. You're like, it's not just something that exists kind of in the ivory tower. It's a language you can learn, and that if you're seeking to succeed in an organization, you need to be able to speak power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, this was just absolutely delightful and very fun and very meandering and lovely conversation, as our conversations always are. Where can our listeners find more of you in this moment, Michael?
Well, if the change stuff is interesting, thechangesignal.com is where you'll find the newsletter. And if you're a podcast listener, which of course you are, you'll find Change Signal as a podcast. If you want more about my general works, mbs.works is the kind of the catch-all website.
Perfect. Thank you so much for doing this. It was really a joy to have you.
It was joyful. Thank you, Rodney.
We are always looking for new topics for the show, and even sometimes for the most exceptional and exquisite guests if listeners have an idea. So if you are having trouble changing something, shoot us a note at podcast@theready.com. This show is engineered by Taylor Marvin and produced by our very good friend Jack Van Amberg. At Work with the Ready is created by The Ready, where we help organizations around the world change the way they work. Thank you so much for listening.